Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Syukur Alhamdulillah, pada pagi ini 28 Ogos, 3 hari sebelum menyambut kemerdekaan, kita bertuah Institut Tamadun dan Kajian Strategik Universiti Malaysia Pahang, which is now parked under Yayasan UMP, dapat mengadakan program Wacana Siri Kepimpinan bersama-sama dengan Datuk Seri Nazir Razak, anak sulung kepada Allahyarham Tun Haji Abdul Razak Datuk Husin, orang kaya Indra Syahbandar Negeri Pahang. Saya mula nak memperkenalkan sedikit sebanyak latar belakang. Saudara Datuk Seri Nazir graduated from the University of Bristol pada tahun 1988 dan mendapat MPhil, Master Philosophy, dari University of Cambridge 1989. 2009, Hardening Fellow at the Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies. 2019, the Transformational Leadership Fellow at the Valvatnik School of Government, Oxford University. Chairman and founding partner of iTKAS Capital. Retired chairman of CIMB Group in October 2018 after a 29-year career with the ASEAN Banking Group. He was Malaysia's top executive and CEO on several occasions, the youngest recipient of Finance Asia's Lifetime Achievement Award dalam tahun 2009, awarded Euromoney's Outstanding Achievement Award 2012, winner of the prestigious Asia House Asian Business Leaders Award 2016, was inaugural chairman of the World Economic Forum ASEAN Regional Strategy Group, and he served on the investment panel for the Employees Provident Fund 2002 to 2017, then Board of Khazanah National 2014-2018. A corporate person, a banker, and post-corporate, was very much involved in engaging new knowledge with Oxford University. Begitu juga saya nak perkenalkan panel pertama kita, Tan Sri Datuk Dr. Kamal binti Mat Saleh, graduated with PhD from Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, 1973, served for 13 years the University of Science Malaysia sebagai professor dan Deputy Vice Chancellor at a very young age, and then left untuk menubuhkan MIER as a founder, executive director under the auspices of the Prime Minister's Advisory Panel 1986. He served MIER sehingga 1994 dan mengundurkan diri. Selepas itu dan join politik. Ini Tan Sri Kamal Saleh was member of parliament. One term dekat Wan Semaju in 1996 general election. Sebenarnya Nazir, for your information, Military College boys would never stand long in politics because they are either yes or no and very few maybe. That's their style. Very firm on that one. So tak banyak grey areas. Then he founded International Medical School, Medical University, IMU in 1992 and remained president and chairman until he retired in 2006. Currently chairman of Yayasan Mahkota, set up in 1996. Itu Tan Sri Kamal Saleh. And he's written a lot of books, and one of them as an author, co-author of Driving Development, Revisiting Razak's Role in Malaysia's Economic Progress, which is a very interesting book. Seterusnya, saya pergi kepada Rahman Bong, Datuk Rahman Bong from Royal Military College, 6064, BA Honours from the University of Leicester, Master from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, PhD Distinction, University of Malaya, Professor Emeritus Sociology, Pembangunan Institut Kajian Malaysia dan Antarabangsa, IKMAS, di Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. And also penasihat khas kepada Persatuan Sains Sosial Malaysia dan Fellow Academy Profesor Malaysia dalam bidang itu. Daripada Universiti Malaysia Pahang, saya perkenalkan Dr. Hasnah binti Hussein, pensyarah kanan di Pusat Sains Kemanusiaan Universiti Malaysia Pahang, mendapat pendidikan Dr. Filosofi Sejarah, Sarjana Sejarah dan Sarjana Muda dari Universiti Malaya, Universiti yang ulum di Universiti di tanah air kita. Beliau banyak menulis, menerbitkan buku Pengajian Malaysia, Oxford Fajar, buku Pengajian Malaysia, edisi vocational, Oxford Fajar juga, buku Etika Profesional, edisi vocational, Pengajian Malaysia, QOUM 207, koleksi contoh soalan hubungan etnik 2013, isu-isu negara bangsa abad ke-21, sejarah, isu dan dimensi 2010, mengajar projek globalisasi hubungan etnik dan pengajian Malaysia, penghayatan etika dan pendaftaran. Last but not least, kita ada wakil ketua pelajar NPPP di waktu masanya dulu, iaitu Cik Farah Ain binti Mazlan, graduan Sarjana Muda Kepujian Kejuruteraan Pembuatan dan dari Universiti Malaysia Pahang 2019, agak fresh graduate ni. Timbalan Ketua Setiausaha Majlis Perwakilan Pelajar MPP 2017-2018, jawatan terkini following Nazir's footstep, Relationship Manager Business Banking, tetapi Bank Malaysia, bukan CIMB. So these are the people, Datuk Seri, who are going to engage with you. So I will start. Being the youngest in the family of 5 brothers, kalau ikutkan Hang Tuah punya legend, Hang Tuah is Najib, Hang Jebat is Johari, and then you got Hang Lekir, Hang Lekyu, Nazim, Nizam, and Nazir. You got Han Nadim. I think the youngest is Han Nadim. Being the youngest amongst the 5, and still not yet 60, only in the mid-50s, but vast experience in the corporate world, knowing what the legacy of your father is in that area, especially in relation to nation building, economic development, especially in relation to the new economic policy, coalition of all political parties through Barisan Nasional, where he also attempted in all his life to build negara bangsa yang berpadu untuk kemakmuran setiap lapisan masyarakat, Melayu, Cina, India, Kadazan dan sebagainya. Itu banyak ethnicity. So, dari segi perspektif itu, sebagai seorang korporat, seorang yang telah pun mencubakan diri untuk mendapat ilmu di Oxford University dan sebagainya, apakah tanggapan Datuk Seri terhadap the role of your father in nation building for 13 years as deputy and about 6 years as prime minister? Practically he was prime minister even during Tengku's time. We will highlight that. What is the legacy that he left behind, and where is the legacy now? So we start from there. It's a big scope, but we start from there. Saya persilakan Datuk Seri.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and terima kasih atas peluang dijemput ke panel Wacana Merdeka UNP ni. I posted a picture of this panel on my Instagram, and immediately I got a call from Dr. Anis Yuzal, who said, "Please be careful. You have 3 RMC alumni attacking you today. Please be very careful." And of course, I know all of you. Thank you so much. And it's very good to be on the panel with Dr. Kamal and Prof. Rahman again. And very nice to meet Dr. Hasna and Farah as well. Firstly, my father passed away when I was 9 years old. So I did not know him well at all. In fact, my actual memories of him are very fleeting. Cuma, duduk atas kursi berdua, berdiri dengan dia macam tu, macam gambaran sikit-sikit je. But especially since I retired, I spent quite a bit of time reflecting on his legacy, meeting a lot of people that was with him. I've recorded many meetings with his friends, and of course, reading the many books that have been written about him, especially the one led by Prof. Rahman as well. So when I look back on his legacy, firstly, I mean, clearly, Tun Razak was, in effect, the master builder of Malaysia. And if you look at the legacy, if you look at the tangible legacy, we think of many things, but including his role in independence, in the fight for independence. And if you take it from the time that On Jaafar stepped down from leadership of UMNO, it was Tun Razak that had to lead the search for a new leader. He very consciously realized that, look, he felt that he wasn't cut out to be leader. He needed someone more charismatic and with stronger networks to lead UMNO. So he went and sought his old friend from London, which is Tengku Rahman, and became Tengku Rahman's right hand. And of course, he did many things in the quest for independence, including he was chairman of the Alliance Ad Hoc Committee, which engaged the Reid Commission, which ultimately came up with the Malaysian Constitution. And that constitution defined the kind of Malaya narrative from then on. And of course, education, you have the Razak Report, and then rural development, which Dr. Hasna is very familiar. That was his passion. He was, firstly he was education minister, then he became rural development minister immediately after independence, and spearheaded FELDA and many agencies. And then, of course, he then was instrumental in handling the May 13th crisis. And to me, that was his biggest moment, which was becoming director of NOC and bringing stability together with Tun Ismail, and then leading the national reset. I mean, to me, we had Malaysia 1.0, which was a Westminster system that we inherited from the British. And then we had a Malaysia 2.0, which was when, in consultation with the National Consultative Council, they came up with 4 big reforms, which is the new economic policy, the Rukun Negara, the tradition laws, as well as fourthly, the formation of the Grand Coalition, Barisan Nasional. And he was effectively a dictator at that point in time. He transformed, and then I remember at that time that rare speech that he I don't remember it, I read it, that he made, where he argued that actually too much power is, if you want to do good, too much power is no good, or something to that effect. And he brought back parliament. It's very rare in history across the world when a dictator actually brings back parliament. And he did that, even though many around him, like Mahathir and all that, actually advised him against it. And of course, also very tangible is his foreign policy. He was, the way he worked with others on the formation of ASEAN, the introduction of Zofan in 1971, as well as, of course, the building the relationship with China, which was really, way ahead of his time. I mean, today, who would have thought? But the fact that he was the first ASEAN leader to visit China in 1974, and that was only 2.5 years after Nixon did, and for years after that, the Chinese ambassador would always come to the house. The new Chinese ambassador would always come to the house to visit, and he would always, he or she would always make this quote, which is that in the Chinese saying, which is he who drinks the water must not forget who dug the well, or something to that effect. And that relationship with China, of course, is of course a very big special relationship with China is a very big part of our foreign policy today. So these are many tangible things that Tun Razak did in building the nation. But my argument is that actually what is more important in terms of the Tun Razak legacy are the intangibles, or yang tidak ketara, if you like, which is the values as well as the methods that he brought to leadership. Because today, when I reflect on the tangible things, many of them are no longer appropriate today. And I think he would have expected us to have reformed many of these things that he introduced. I think he would probably not be so happy that the NEP that was launched in 1970 still remains substantially in place in 2020, when Tun Razak and Tun Razak only wanted it for 20 years. So when we look at his methods, I think it's very important to understand the man and his value system. I mean, we have what we call a reference narrative on Tun Razak, which is I don't know if you know the story of his anger at his children because we wanted a swimming pool at Sri Taman, and he was very angry because he felt that this is a government house, this is government money. How can I possibly justify building a swimming pool? So integrity and sense of national mission, it was very important to him. Kemudian, when you look at his other characteristics, I mean, I feel he was a both and person. He liked to mix things up, and if you look at parts of his personality, sometimes they contradict. Like, he was very consultative, but he was very bold. Right? If you look at the NCC, he consulted widely, but he boldly launched these reforms. Education report, he consulted widely, and he launched the Razak report. So he was consultative, but he was decisive when he needed to. He took small steps and big steps. He took small steps. He liked to visit rural areas all the time. Every weekend when he could, he'd visit. He loved visiting, but at the same time, he did big things like forming Felda and other agencies, because he felt that big things are needed to make a substantive change. I think he was also a very self-assured team player, and so sometimes people are self-assured, they don't like teams. But if you look at Tun Razak, he built future leaders, like and the fact that we think of his legacy a lot was also because Malaysia was effectively run by Razak boys all the way until Razak's son. If you think of after him, it was Tun Hussein, then Tun Mahathir, and then Pak Lah, and even the deputies, right? Even Ghaffar Baba and so on. Very much Razak boys. And if you look at many of the state agencies were also many Razak boys, Tengku Razali, Tengku Syariman, many Razak boys were really running the country many years after Razak left. So to him, building new leaders is important. And I would say that's one of the issues we face today, the grooming of future leaders. And when Tunku stepped down, he became lead director of NOC. Don't forget, he brought in Tun Ismail as his number 2. Not many people are so self-assured that they bring in a number 2 who was their opponent. Tun Ismail challenged Tun Razak for deputy leader of UMNO in the late 50s. Right? But 10 years later, he brought Tun Ismail. And Tun Ismail doesn't suffer fools. I mean, he scolds his boss.
Yeah.
That was his personality. And you must be a self-assured person to like people who challenge you around you.
So, Dr. Sri, before you go further, I just like to get Professor Rahman to engage with you regarding the formative age of Tun during his London days. And Rahman is very familiar because he's very involved in Malaysia Forum dan sebagainya. So can I call upon Tan Sri Rahman to engage dengan Nazir berkenaan dengan kepimpinan beliau yang diasah, molded before we go further into the legacy. During his student days, both in Raffles as well as in London itself, and the people surrounding him. Please, Rahman, for you, I give the floor to you.
Terima kasih moderator Tan Sri Aziz. Assalamualaikum kepada Datuk Sri Nazir dan Datuk Tan Sri Kamal and the other panelists. Terima kasih kepada ITKAS dan UMP kerana undangan kepada saya untuk menyertai sebagai salah seorang ahli panel dalam majlis Wacana Merdeka ini. Tajuk yang sangat penting, menarik, and it's I feel very honored to be on the same panel as Datuk Sri Nazir, who is from the illustrious Razak family. You have mentioned to Datuk Sri Nazir, I just want to relate to what you have been saying just now. I think you have made a very good point about the intangible values and methods that Tun Razak has established and has left behind as his legacies. It's not so much the infrastructure, but those things, the leadership values that are very important, decisive, consultative yet decisive and bold, very self-assured and so on. So I would like to go back into history a bit. The turning point of the young Razak, I don't know much about the Raffles years, but the London years, I think it was very crucial in his formative years that more or less became the turning point that shaped his thinking, his style of leadership, and his engagement with a multi-ethnic group. For example, and also that shaped his sense of mission for an independent Malaya and then, of course, Malaysia. Now, if I just would like to pick a few points. For example, on his journey on the way to London by boat, he stopped in India. And India was divided at that time between India and Pakistan, and there was ethnic riots. And the message from that incident was that to gain independence, there must be unity between the different ethnic groups. That's number one. Then he went to London, and London was, of course, has always been the center for movements, political movements. At that time, of course, anti-colonial and independence movement, and he was one of those founders of Malayan Forum, which was a very active student group that articulated independence, and it also grew many young student leaders then who later on played a very important role in Malaya. And then, of course, he, among other things, despite his background, he was a member of the Federal Society. He was in the Labour Party. He went to Hyde Park, listening to all sorts of speeches, anti-British, etc., etc. And that was him. And he collaborated with a number of others. At that time, Go Keng Swee, Maurice Baker, P.G. Lim, etc., etc. So, in other words, he more or less, when he despite, I mean, besides, of course, being a student of law, to complete his law studies, he was also a very active young student leader, involved in the spirit of the struggle for independence of the home country. But at the same time, he was also developing those kind of values that you mentioned about confidence, such as self-assured, consultative, multi-ethnic, and so on and so forth. Now, and then another thing that I would like to point out from during that period was his networking, his connection with Des Alwi.
Yes.
Des Alwi was anak angkat kepada Wakil Presiden Indonesia, and which he used very productively in order to prepare the condition for to solve the problem of confrontation later on. So my question to you is, I mean, I don't want to go too long on this, but my question to you is, when did you find out about your father's background, being socialist in orientation, being very active, and being very forward-looking and all that. And when you found out, what was your reaction? Were you inspired, or were you shocked, or whatever? I mean, coming from his background.
No, no, no. I mean, I don't know when exactly, but I always knew of his history with the Fabian Society. I always knew that he was slightly left-leaning, and as you know, there is a very difficult period after he passed away, when a lot of the his kind of kitchen cabinet were arrested for being socialists or communists. Maybe Dola Ahmad and Dola Majid and all that. And I think that really amplified. And part of the arguments used against them was this rapproche, this relationship with China, and the models to employ the state for development and so on. Yeah. So at that time, I was quite aware of this. His leaning, and I think he was a very pragmatic person. I think being part of Fabian Society Labour Party was twofold. One is probably his more leftward orientation, but also I think he felt that independence was always more likely under the Labour government than a Conservative government, and I think he worked those networks. I also recall, I think around that time, one of the defining moments was he actually went to speak at the World Youth Assembly in Brussels, and he went there and created a lot of international ties. And through DES, he would meet all the independence leaders of Indonesia then, and they even had fundraising to help the Indonesian government, Indonesian politicians then.
So that means the formative age of Tun, from London you can see the coalition, the spirit of togetherness, and at the same time I think kita nampak amat jelas the ability to organize. Tun punya networking very it's not dynamic, but he's a worker. Dengan Des Alwi, dengan Sultan Syahrir, dengan even Hatta, and he went all the way even to the Dan Haag, untuk menemui pemimpin pejuang-pejuang Indonesia. So, and then Lee Kuan Yew was there during that time. You mentioned about Goh Keng Swee, Maurice Becker, semua tu, all there, and this became the springboard untuk membentuk pemikiran Tun dengan Harold Lasky sekali. Mungkin tak pergi London School of Economics supaya Rahman Bom pergi, kalau tidak lagi hebatnya dari segi pencanang pemikiran. But the leftists there is sebenarnya ni yang nak relate back kepada Tun as a background dia. Tun sebenarnya dibesarkan di environment kampung, kampung Pulau Keladi. Even though the father was the district officer and all that, and orang kaya Indah Shah Bandar, but Tun punya exposure to the kampung life at the early age, I think that create a lot of impact on his philosophy of life and perjuangan dia. Sebab itulah there is already a binary composition within Tun himself, within an aristocrat. He's born an aristocrat in a family aristocrat, at the same time being exposed to the life of the kampung folk. Mandi Sungai Pahang, terjun during my time. Kau kita terjun Sungai Pahang, masa tu ada pipe lagi. That sort of life, and that sort of life shaped his mind when he became leader, in order to go back 60,000 batu setahun dia jalan menerusi kampung-kampung dan sebagainya. Di sini saya rasa molding kepimpinan Tun. Saya nak tanya sekarang ni Tan Sri Kamal Saleh, who is very much an economist in his discipline. But what do you see of Tun when he took the power as a chief of the nation, as a Perdana Menteri kedua, selepas menjadi timbalan selama 13 tahun, who was practically the de facto prime minister juga, dan apa sebenarnya economic well-being yang dipaparkan? Tan Sri Kamal Saleh.
You're on mute, Tan Sri. Your mute button, Tan Sri.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Oh, Unmute.
Unmute. Dah unmute tadi.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Assalamualaikum. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Pertama sekali saya ingin mengucapkan ribuan terima kasih kepada pihak UNP. Pertama sekali kepada saya sendiri. We go a long way, and this is not the first forum we are doing together. But I am privileged to be for the first time with Dr. Srinazir on a panel. We have never interacted like this. Intellectually, so it's a good opportunity.
Padam. You're on.
Your mute is on again.
Unmute.
I'm using a
Unmute. Minta unmute Kak Tan Sri. Unmute. Yeah.
I'm using my phone, so that's why
Keeps getting.
Your microphone is not on.
Boleh technical side handle.
Microphone.
yeah, I know. Something's wrong with my telephone. It keeps calling, causing that problem. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
All right. I was just trying to say that what a privilege to be on the same panel for the first time with Nazir, and on a subject which is very much my favorite, more or less, because I have always treated, maybe others do also. Obviously, Tun Razak is a hero, and when I came back, I just devoted a lot of my time studying the new economic policy, and there's no doubt that what he will be remembered most, well, aside from the foreign policy issue, as well as the education policy, which I will raise later. He is the architect of the new economic policy, and all my life, professional life, is devoted to understanding the implications of that policy and what it means for us and how it's proceeding. So I wrote a chapter in that same book that Ramanambo also wrote, not wrote of Tun Razak. In that book, I mentioned about this point that whatever it is, the new economic policy will be associated with Tun Razak, and I think the nation is grateful for that. But of course, the new economic policy has fallen into much disrepute, which is a peculiarly Malaysian.
Lost you again.
Unmute, please, Kamal. Your voice.
Yeah, I am doing it because it seems to
Now
be
okay dah.
falling. Yeah, and I'm saying that the NP is a unique situation, which on my research and so on, I have never interacted with Tun Razak personally. It was much later in Committee 5 when Tun Mahathir brought me into the economic panel that I did interact with the government as such. But as an academic, I always follow, of course, what the evolution of the policy, the underpinnings, and the reason why, and the impact of that policy. And so Mazda, given his salient days, obviously is very concerned about social justice. But the new economic policy has got an extra dimension. It is not just social justice in normal kind of past issue, but because of the multipolarity of our country, it has got an national dimension. And one could say that it is also got a historic dimension as historical justice as a result of the impact of colonial policies of divide and rule, of the division between the races, placing the Malays into rural areas, except for some smarting, lucky ones, more maybe intelligent ones, to become civil servants or clerks in the civil service, the British service. But more or less, there was a separation of occupation and so on. So I think all of this was understood by Tun Razak growing up as well as studying in uh, in London, and his Fabian Association obviously will reinforce it even further. So the new economic policy I then saw basically as a social justice, not socialistic, but a way in which income distribution becomes very important and poverty becomes an issue. And it is well formulated, I thought at that time, and I studied it in that sense and endorsed it. Um, but I think later he hoped that, and that's after he has passed away. I wouldn't know. And I want to ask another last question. Uh, and it evolved into something that becomes like a bad word. And for a time, even the Malays in the civil service were afraid to be known as a Malay and to espouse economic, the new economic policy. And that was how, when I was brought in by Tun Tun Pala, uh, who brought the Malay agenda into the public policy or development policy. So that is the thing that now I'm very concerned, how we go forward. The formally the policy is supposed to end in 1990, but we know that later it was shown also that we have not met the target set, particularly the restructuring aspect from the equity policy, which is Nazir's question. But it has to formally end. But just before it ends, the government was not even thinking about this current replacement policy. And so we, with Ghani Osman and a few others, formed a ad hoc committee, which was endorsed by Tun Mahathir later, but very informally, to find what is the post-1990 policy. At that time, I was in MIR, so we did that as our focus, even though we had to continue to maintain very open stand. But later, further on, being forward, this policy became very much a pejorative statement by the government and became very unpopular. And now we know that the issue of economic policy, I myself have rejected it. But largely not because of the policy as formulated by Albert Bloom and Johan Yuswalan team, Rai Sadiman was there, and Tukur Razali, and so on. When Tun Razak was alive, uh, formulation was correct, and the early stages of implementation itself had required the role of government in the economy strongly, and that's why you got the economic nationalism phase of Tunku Razali in the beginning until the recession of 1985, when then Tun Mahathir opened the economy up. But I think uh, the problem was with the manner in which it was implemented. That is what many now understand. Possibly because of the culture of corruption, of
Yeah.
dependency of the market, the lack of meritocracy, and so on, and the water system, especially to the extent that they would say the first leg of the two-prong approach, or three-prong approach. the poverty eradication part should be restless, whereas restarting obviously have to be okay. But poverty to be eradicated regardless of it. And I think that at the moment the push for an age-based policy post post 1990. Obviously, people are highlighting as what you mentioned against the riches of to be
Uh,
racial while we focus on economic development. So we now reach a stage where the implementation has become so bad, policy one, money policy, and also we slip into the wastage and the corruption
mm,
of the whole. So we are at that stage where we are almost so many people are condemning the new economic policy. Yet it was actually purposely and
okay.
nothing into that. My
Okay, Tan
question
Sri.
to Michael
Yeah.
Aziz, question
Yeah.
to Dr. Nazir is because he has been really been concerned about the need to have a more conservative approach to where we go forward post COVID-19. I want to ask him now that I have the chance. Sorry, uh, if he was alive, what do you think he would think about the current state of affairs? Don't have to say more about it. Thank you.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. So it's now on your lap, Nazir.
Thank you, Tan Sri. And firstly, on your comments on the new economic policy, I totally agree, and I think it's very important for us to, um, you know, repair the misrepresentation of what the NEP was. I mean, to me, clearly the NEP was a policy to unite Malaysians. It was to accelerate the foundations of Malaysian Malaysia or Bangsa Malaysia, whichever way you want to put it. And we couldn't create a nation when there's such disparity between ethnic groups. And so, and Tun Razak clearly believed in the power and effectiveness of the state, and hence, this the whole NEP model, and it actually went very well, especially in the first 20 years. You look at poverty eradication, you look at rebalancing of wealth, etc. It went very well. It wasn't perfect, but it went very well. But the NEP had a lot of side effects. And the three side effects are money corruption, concentration of power in government and ultimately the prime minister's office, and three is the hardening of identities. Whilst we can talk about it as a uniting policy, but at the same time, when you are a non-Malay and you achieve high grades and you cannot get a scholarship, or you're a non-Malay business and you're having to give out shares at a cheap discount. I mean, you individually feel somewhat unfairly treated. So these were its side effects, and that's why I think the NEP needed a finite time. In 1990, we effectively extended it, and unfortunately, in the early 90s, when there was this huge stock market boom, the NEP was kind of narrowed down to this whole giving 30% of shares in all companies to Malays, and all the corruption that surrounded. And I can never understand how, whilst we want to allocate, say contracts to Malays, why we never had competition between Malays, right? The political master said because of NEP we have to give the contract to a certain Malay as opposed to framework for competition between Malays. And so these are examples of how the NEP was manipulated, I think, for political ends, and so on. I mean, to me, I think, if Tun Razak were alive today and he looked at the present situation, firstly, he said, look, I designed many things for the context, which is the 70s. Why are you guys still employing the same policies today? Shouldn't you go through a process of, looking at the needs of the nation and its people today, and recalibrate or come up with policies that are relevant for today? And that's why, in other platforms, I have called for for us to kind of balik ke pangkal jalan, which is to look back at what Tun Razak's methods, which in 1970 was the establishment of a truly independent platform of intellectuals, leaders, etc., to debate a kind of Malaysia 3.0. I think the 2.0 that he set up worked, but had side effects, and it is out of date now. We need a 3.0, and in that 3.0, we need to, put all the matters on the table. Do we need affirmative action? Probably. If so, for how long more? Should we still have vernacular schools? If so, for how long more?
Yeah.
And to do this kind of, this intercommunal trades to come up with, a new formula for a new Malaysia.
Yeah. Okay, Nazir, there were two majlis perundingan ekonomi, Mapen 1, Mapen 2, to recalibrate what is really happening on the ground. I was part of Mapen 2, Majlis Perundingan Ekonomi 2, where there's a lot of bargaining process going on between all races, all parties. This is on the same basis that Tun buat when he was trying to come up with dasar ekonomi baru dan sebagainya. Which is the other coin of it, the other binary part is the social engineering, the social engineering part tu yang tak jalan. The one thing is to give to the Malays certain privileges, but the social engineering, meaning the people who are now considered as, say, B40 or even below B40, the underclass, tak kira Melayu, Cina, India. And Tun waktu itu collected all the ideas. Saya terperanjat terbaca terbaru ini, selain daripada the Harvard Business Group, Samuel Huntington was part of his team, from Harvard to be advising Tun. Then only the Fallon Group, the Rais Saniman and all that. Meaning to say, he engaged all these people with ideas and translated it. But since then, the engagement tak ada. The dasar ekonomi baru dan cetuskan Bumi dilahirkan mengurusi Kongres, Bumi Putra Kongres, Economic Kongres. But since then, we sort of became so aloof, neglecting all those idea formation from the genuine groups to assist us. So di sini saya merasakan saya nak jemput Dr. Hasna Hussein, who is still a part of the academia. Kita ni dah keluar pada academia, and she did a couple of articles, kajian terhadap rancangan pembangunan tanah di negeri Pahang, Darul Makmur, satu kajian terhadap pembangunan tanah di zaman pemerintahan Tun Razak, dan juga persepsi majikan terhadap kemahiran insaniah dan kebolehan asaran graduan tipsas dan sebagainya. So, and then Tun Razak bapa pembangunan luar bandar. I mentioned earlier, based on the statistics that people have compiled, Tun pergi round the countryside, 60,000 batu setahun. That sort of person dia, dengan tongkat dia, dengan bush jacket dia. That's a symbol of Tun. And pada masa yang sama, which is now lacking, operationalizing this, menerusi buku merah. You see, Tun punya presence, not an articulate person, but dia pada cukup. Every civil servants, everybody engaging that project patuh kepada kurang amanah pun tak ada, integrity, governance, semuanya solid with Tun and his team. Orang takut, orang respect. But that sort of thing caused a decay of the parameters established by Tun. Since then, money politics came to the picture, and then the head, as usual, started the kerosakan, the echo pun rosak macam ikan dan sebagainya. And this is the damage of what was established. So saya nak panggil Dr. Asna, engagekan dengan Datuk Sri Nazir. Silakan Dr. Asna.
Your mute button, tak?
Mute. Button.
Okay, Assalamualaikum dan terima kasih diucapkan kepada penerusi panel kita pada hari ini. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dr. Abdul Aziz bin Abdul Rahman yang juga selaku pengerusi ITKAS UMP. Pihak ITKAS kerana telah menjemput saya untuk bersama-sama menjayakan bicara Kepimpinan Tun Razak dan Masa Depan Malaysia. Dan tidak lupa juga yang dihormati tetamu kehormat kita yang berbahagia Datuk Sri Muhammad Nazir bin Haji Tun Abdul Razak dan juga beberapa barisan ahli panel yang berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Dr. Kamal, yang berbahagia Prof. Emeritus Datuk Dr. Abdul Rahman Embong dan Cik Farah Ain bekas MPP UMP yang juga adalah bekas pelajar saya sebelum ini. Okey, sebagaimana yang kita sedia maklum ya, Tun Razak dalam sejarah negara kita dikenali sebagai bapa pembangunan negara dan merupakan Perdana Menteri Malaysia yang kedua. Kan? Dan gelaran bapa pembangunan yang diberikan kepada beliau adalah atas sumbangan beliau dalam meletakkan batu asas kepada sistem pembangunan negara, khususnya pembangunan luar bandar. Dan tidak keterlaluan jika dikatakan Tun Razak disanjung sebagai wira oleh penduduk luar bandar pada waktu itu. Ya. Kenapa saya kata begitu? Sebab perangkaan tahun 1957 menunjukkan bahawa 2/3 daripada penduduk tanah Melayu tinggal di luar bandar. Jadi bagi Tun Razak, dia melihat bahawa pembangunan negara perlu dilakukan secara menyeluruh dan negara tidak boleh maju jika di bandar maju membangun tetapi di kampung miskin. Sebab itulah pembangunan bandar menjadi agenda penting semasa pemerintahan beliau. Dan beliau memang dilantik sebagai Menteri Pembangunan Bandar lah pada waktu itu. Jadi kepada yang tak tahu sangat tentang sejarah negara, ya, sebenarnya selepas negara kita mencapai kemerdekaan 1957, memang tak banyak pembangunan. Kan? Kalau ada sekolah, hospital, jalan raya pun hanya bertumpu di tempat tertentu sahaja. Begitu juga dari segi pembangunan insaniah, masih ramai penduduk rakyat tanah Melayu yang buta huruf. Kan? Sebab tu kita tengok dalam cerita P. Ramlee, kita pernah tengok cerita dia tunjuk pasal sekolah dewasa yang terdiri daripada orang-orang tua. So jadi sebenarnya filem P. Ramlee itu bukan menipu. Dia menggambarkan suasana keadaan negara kita pada zaman dahulu. Semua rakyat tanah Melayu, orang tua tidak boleh membaca dan menulis. Jadi pembangunan modal insan yang jadi negara kita kekurangan segala-galanya waktu lepas kemerdekaan dari segi infrastruktur dan juga pembangunan modal insan. Jadi Tun melihat tanggungjawab dia waktu itu sangat berat. Jadi dia nak tengok orang Melayu bangun daripada kemiskinan dan kejahilan yang telah dipupuk semasa pendudukan British di negara ini. Jadi bila dia jadi dilantik sebagai Menteri Pembangunan Bandar, dan kita tak sangka dalam waktu yang singkat saja, tak sampai 10 tahun, kawasan luar bandar telah dilengkapi dan dibangunkan dengan pelbagai kemudahan. Apa yang menjadi kebanggaan kita semua, mungkin ada yang tak tahu bahawa cara Tun Razak membangunkan luar bandar zaman itu telah ditiru oleh negara Asia yang lain dan beberapa buah negara di Amerika. So ini satu kejayaan yang luar biasa bagi negara kita. Sebab kita itu baru merdeka. Tapi negara luar boleh tiru cara tanah Melayu membangunkan negara dia. Okay? Dan dalam melaksanakan pembangunan negara, terutamanya pembangunan luar bandar, sebenarnya Tun Razak telah lay a foundation to us nowadays that we must focus on agriculture. Okay? Saya katakan bahawa Tun Razak adalah seorang pemimpin yang berpandangan jauh dan beliau pandai menyusun program pembangunan negara. Ya? Dan dia tahu mana yang perlu diberi keutamaan. Okay, dalam hal ini saya melihat beliau telah meletakkan pertanian sebagai perkara paling penting dalam pembangunan negara mengatasi perkara-perkara lain. Sebab itu kita tengok zaman tu dalam setiap rancangan pembangunan 5 tahun negara, beliau memfokuskan pertanian sebagai asas utama, diberikan peruntukan yang utama. Dan soalan saya, mengapa sekarang ini negara kita mengabaikan sektor pertanian? Dulu kita ada Universiti Pertanian Malaysia. Sekarang sudah digantikan dengan Universiti Putra Malaysia. Saya melihat ini sebagai langkah yang kurang wajar kerana kita perlu satu institusi yang khas yang mana kewujudan dia khas untuk membangunkan sektor pertanian negara. Saya rasa ini merupakan satu faktor kenapa Malaysia tidak mampu membangunkan sektor pertanian seperti di Thailand. Kerana Malaysia tidak mempunyai tenaga pakar dalam sektor ini. Bagaimana masa depan Malaysia, soalan saya? Adakah kita akan terus mengimport beras, sayuran, buahan dan lain-lain barang makanan daripada luar, mengimport daging daripada negara luar, timbul isu halal haram sampai bila? Saya takut suatu nanti negara jiran pun dah tak mampu nak membekalkan beras kepada rakyat negara ini. Pandemik COVID, kita tak tahu sampai bila. Jika berlarutan, untuk berapa tahun lagi? Berkemungkinan kita akan hadapi masalah kekurangan makanan. Ya? Dan kita harus tahu bahawa Pahang adalah negeri terbesar di Malaysia dan mempunyai banyak tanah kosong yang tidak diusahakan. Jadi, ini merupakan satu kerugian kepada negeri Pahang kerana Pahang boleh membangunkan sektor pertanian, dia boleh menjadi negeri pembekal hasil-hasil pertanian kepada negara lain. Boleh jadi negeri yang membekalkan beras kepada seluruh penduduk negara kita. Kan? Tapi apa yang kita lihat hari ini, kekosongan itu digunakan oleh individu tertentu mengusahakan tanaman durian secara haram. So saya rasa, saya nak tanya Tan Sri, adakah sektor pertanian tidak lagi relevan dalam negara menuju perindustrian 4.0 sekarang ini? Saya sebagai rakyat Malaysia, saya sangat takut one day rakyat negara ini tidak ada makanan sebab terlalu bergantung kepada orang lain. Apa yang saya nak simpulkan di sini, Tun Razak telah pun memberi kita landasan bahawa dalam sektor pembangunan negara, sektor pertanian jangan ditinggalkan. Tapi saya nak you all fikir sama-sama hari ini. Apa masa depan makanan rakyat Malaysia?
Terima kasih Dr. Hasna. A very relevant point.
Tan Sri, satu point lagi. Iaitu Tun Razak ni kan, dia dalam melaksanakan pembangunan negara, dia sangat mementingkan pemantauan. Kita boleh tengok saja kepada rancangan buku merah bilik gerakan yang dia laksanakan semasa zaman dia. Kan? Dengan wujudnya buku merah bilik gerakan, itu telah banyak membantu pihak kerajaan memantau permasalahan rakyat luar bandar daripada akar umbi sampai ke atas. Jadi saya nak tanya Tan Sri, dalam konteks pembangunan negara hari ini, adakah pemerintah masih menggunakan kaedah ini? Sebab kalau kita tengok di media masa hari ini, masih banyak rakyat yang miskin, terabai. Hidup miskin sangat terabai, sama ada di bandar dan luar bandar. Bagi pendapat saya, jurang antara yang kaya dan miskin masih lagi tinggi pada hari ini. Adakah disebabkan kurangnya pemantauan menyebabkan wujudnya masalah pengabaian macam ni? Jadi saya nak tanya Tan Sri, adakah guna yang cara ataupun kaedah yang dipakai oleh Tun Razak dahulu tidak sesuai lagi dilaksanakan pada masa sekarang? So sekian, terima kasih daripada saya.
Terima kasih Dr. Hasna. Itu panjang tu. Banyak point yang di raise on food security, on the binary arrangement of RR 4.0 vis-a-vis the traditional economic sector. Dan juga disentuh juga tentang fiscal policy. Ini Datuk Seri Nazir memang expert. Bagaimana our sovereign wealth menerusi Petronas dan sebagainya dwindling. Whereas the sovereign wealth of Singapore nak keluarkan duit tu kena presiden dia sendiri mengawasinya. Begitu juga dengan sovereign wealth di Sweden dan sebagainya, semuanya solid, trillions of dollars. Jadi from the fiscal point, I did remember you mentioned about how we should take advantage of those companies yang banyak mendapatkan pendapatan yang melambung-lambung ni. Patutnya tax structure dia mesti mencerminkan. Termasuklah juga bank. You are a banker. Bagaimana the gap between newly recruited staff dengan the top people in the bank, as an example, gaji dia bukan campur bonus dekat-dekat 10 juta, tetapi graduate kita tahap yang lama. Masuk aja kepada bank, dia dapat 3,000, 4,000. Whereas the gap between the top and the lowest rung di US ke mana-mana is substantially reduced. kita the gap is widening very fast. So macam mana benda ni dapat mengikut pandangan Datuk Seri for us to look into. Thank you. Yes, Datuk. Mute.
Sorry, on the issue of agriculture, you remember under Padah dulu, he brought back the emphasis on agriculture, and under Khazanah, there was a whole initiative called the MAFC, Malaysia Agriculture Food Corporation. Unfortunately, that one was a long haul, cost Khazanah a lot of money, and was rather poorly implemented in the end. But under Najib subsequently, the emphasis on agriculture was a little more diluted. But I totally agree with you that in terms of the present government, I would advocate a review of our agriculture policies, and in particular, the whole issue of food security. We were looking at it the other day. I think Malaysia imports something like 60 billion ringgit a year of things it doesn't need to import. Yeah, but the concept of food security is this: that in the end of the day, we might need to grow or manufacture our own, agriculture food instead of importing. And even though importing is economically the more logical thing to do, like beef, for instance, right? Because there is a real security issue. Because one day, COVID has brought this whole security issue to the front, which is one day, if your borders are really close, do you have enough food? Right? So one is the import bill, two is actually the security side of it. And here the government ultimately needs to have the incentive framework to encourage our agriculture sector to grow things and manufacture things instead of importing. So sometimes you have to provide the subsidies, etc. And here we go back to the many agencies that were set up under Tun Razak's time. So a lot of the infrastructure is there. We can do it, but we do need the government to emphasize in it. In terms of the whole issue of inequality and so on, I also subscribe to this whole. I've been talking about it elsewhere. That in the end of the day, we need to look at our policies such that growth is more inclusive, and we need to certainly lift the minimum wage. And this whole tax structure is a big issue today. I've gone on record to say that, look, we don't know who is going to pay the bill for COVID, because the government definitely needs to borrow more to help the rakyat. And how is the government going to repay that? I am strongly in favor of windfall tax for certain segments. Yeah, so in areas like the glove companies where they made a lot of money because of COVID, well, they should actually be taxed and more in order to pay for our people who are becoming very poor because of COVID. What is wrong with windfall tax? We've already had windfall tax for plantation companies before. I think there's also other innovative ways of reforming taxation that the government has to consider. I think the PH government made a big mistake to remove GST completely. I think they should have reduced GST to a small amount. It was probably too high at 6% to down to 1 or 2%, but at least the infrastructure was there. And then we need to look at things like capital gains tax, because to me today, if you work hard, you make things, you make profit, you're going to be taxed. But if you make money by trading on the stock market, you don't get taxed. That's not right. Right? And in the end of the day, under this COVID, what has happened is actually people who have finance securities or trade in shares, etc., are doing okay. Share price is okay. But people who lose their jobs are suffering. Right? People who have small businesses are suffering. So there is a need to relook at this whole, social contract between the haves and haves not to reduce the inequality in this country. And the whole emphasis on agriculture would also have that same end. And net, I hope you all don't also call me a socialist.
But it's true, we've got all the natural resources, good for agriculture. You know, the conversion of Madi punya research to the application in the industry, years and years. I visited Thailand, antara penyelidikan pertanian dengan commercialization dia dalam masa setahun aja. Things happen. So something wrong with that. Anyway, got farmer lagi. But farmer tak ada mak rempit nak hantar barang-barang yang berlambak di luar bandar. Masa COVID ni tak disampaikan kepada pembeli-pembeli. So there's a lot of systematic masalah lah yang perlu diatasi. So saya nak dengar apa Farah fikir dengan Tun Razak yang zaman-zaman kami dulu dengan orang-orang muda daripada generasi X, Y, Z ni, dan dengan wujudnya berbagai news, fake or otherwise, melalui social media. What is the thinking on the young people dari segi legacy foundation yang dibentuk, yang diasaskan, ke mana perginya? Jadi mungkin dapat dihuraikan oleh Farah dan boleh bertanya juga kepada berkenaan dengan pengalaman Datuk Seri Nazir. Silakan Farah.
Terima kasih Tan Sri. Okay, first of all, salam sejahtera. Thank you so much for Tan Sri for inviting me. It's really an honor to be a panel today, because alongside with such incredible experience, professional panels, I feel so humbled. I feel so small actually, but thank you so much, Tan Sri. So listening Datuk Sri Nazir and Professor Tan Sri sendiri bercakap tentang legacy Tun Razak, it's like coming from a very young kid here. I personally don't have the experience of first-hand experience of Tun Razak punya zaman pemerintahan dia, zaman kepimpinan dia, his leadership, because practically I wasn't born yet, but I believe it. My parents had the first-hand experience of his leadership and his prime minister days, especially on the development that is happening during that times, during the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. I practically grew up having the experience of his son's leadership, actually, Datuk Sri Najib. And I believe whatever we have today is something that was coming from him. Whatever I have today is coming from development and his leadership and his grooming of current leaders from Tun Razak punya leadership when he was the prime minister of the country. So dari segi perspektif anak muda sekarang ini, mungkin we don't have the experience, but then what we want is something similar, similarly what Tun Razak have made, because we don't see the quality of leadership, such leadership, honestly, today, because whatever we have currently, I'm not belittling but we don't have the confidence in the future of the country. Actually, our concern as a anak muda zaman sekarang ini is what is going to happen in the future, because whatever we have in the future, whatever is in place for us, is actually affected by how much the country moves as a whole nation move, and how the economy is going to be after COVID, and how much how the community grew is actually affected by how the country is building, and how the country is building is directly impacted by who is leading the country. So Datuk Sri, this is a question directly to Datuk Sri Nazir lah.
Okay.
From your experience in the long experience in the corporate world and the leadership world, what is your advice for the young people like us to sustain in such unpredicted future of the country, and how are we going to be strong and face the challenges in the future, with the uncertain future, in order to ensure the country is moving forward and and growing and becoming a better country.
And I just add a bit, Dato' Sri, the trust deficit, it would appear to me now, terhakisnya kepercayaan, the confidence of the leadership set moving forward. So together with Farah tadi, the angle. Terima kasih.
Yeah, thank you, Farah. And I, for your information, had a dialogue just a week ago with the national leadership of the Muda movement, right? And they asked me questions precisely surrounding this topic. And I firmly believe that the system no longer works, and I firmly believe that the system today is largely a result of the side effects, the bad side effects of Malaysia 2.0. These were unintended side effects, but they are real. And these side effects, like corruption, concentration of power, as well as hardening of identities, these unintended side effects are such that, I describe Malaysia as being ruled by this three-headed monster, right? And we really need to admit the first stage of dealing with any problem is to recognize the problem. We need to admit that the system is such that we have this three-headed monster that we need to slash. Two is our plural or multicultural society is such that reforms are very difficult to do piecemeal. You look at this Pakatan Harapan government, they came in with promising to reform everything, right? And yet, when they tried to reform, they couldn't. You look at Najib, when he came in, he was Prime Minister Transformer. He tried to make changes with his new economic model and so on, couldn't get it through because the vested interest in the present system is so strong, right? And they will basically attack any progressive reforms. If you look at PH, they came up with the UEC, which is a fairly benign reform, which is to recognize exam certificates, right? Or sign the International Convention on Human Rights. They couldn't do fairly benign reforms because as soon as something is done piecemeal, it gets wrapped around race and religion, and then you cannot move. So this is my argument that we have to go back to Tun Razak's model of negotiating, deliberating this offline. Parliament is inherently unsuitable for structural reforms. Politicians, we vote them, we tell them to represent us for 5 years and therefore vote for us on everything for the next 5 years. Actually, it's not true. They vote in accordance with what their party leader wants, and they vote in accordance with what they need to do in order to win the next election, right? So they cannot deal with structural reforms. And the world over, many countries are realizing these limitations in their system and setting up these deliberative assemblies, they call it, right? Like the Citizens' Assembly in Ireland and many other countries, to basically say, look, if the system doesn't work, we need to design a better system for our country. And that is what Tun Razak did in 1970. And I firmly believe that is what Malaysia needs today. And we need to move fast because we voted once and had 3 different prime ministers, right? And the system isn't working, right? And you look at the recent cabinet, clearly, whatever the prime minister wants, he can't do very much because these are the 220 people that we elected. And these are the constraining equations, however he wants to move, right? So the system is really broken. We need to overhaul, and you cannot overhaul piecemeal. You need to overhaul the whole thing holistically. And if we don't do it, it will be a disservice to your generation. I mean, the rest of us in this panel will be, I've only got a few years to go. It's your generation that is facing the challenge of the 4th Industrial Revolution, where economic growth will be driven by talent, will be driven by innovation, We don't have that system. Our system is very much driven by big companies, by government-linked corporations, that inherently suppresses entrepreneurship and innovation. We need to overhaul the system. And I've gone on record to say Malaysia does not have an economy. We only have a political economy, right? And we need to break this overhaul this system now, because Malaysia is not a failed state, but Malaysia is a nation in decline. And law of physics means that when you're declining, you will accelerate downwards.
Okay.
Right. So we need to arrest that decline now.
Yeah. Okay, Nazir, we saw what happened quite recently. The Yang di-Pertuan Agong, our king, is now the only king in the country, perhaps in the world, that has sworn in about 3 prime ministers already. And then his tenure of sovereign head is maybe extended beyond the next PRU 15. General election 15 berkemungkinan melampaui dia punya term of office. So he may have 4 or 5 prime ministers during his time. And then I just want to tap your views. After sworn in as a prime minister, Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri, a person from Bera, Pahang, also Temerloh, my old place, when I met with Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Guan Eng, dan Mak Sabu and all that, is there a possibility of the cabinet from what it is now to be complemented by what you were mentioning just now, a deliberative move, a group of people based probably on the operational side, probably based on the what they call talent and professionalism, to assist the present government to move forward with less politicking or less COVID politic, but more COVID dismantling. Please.
Well, I hope that PM actually collaborates across the aisle. I think that will be very, very a good move. I think when you read between the lines, I think clearly a lot of very influential people, including maybe some of the rulers, wanted a unity government. And when many countries that go to war have unity governments,
yeah.
And perhaps we need it at a time of war against COVID. But unfortunately, constitutionally, we don't have it.
Yeah.
Right. So I hope that PM works across the aisle to have some form of a kind of break from politics and focus on what the rakyat needs. Right.
Yeah.
But that is, Tan Sri, that is operational. But
Yeah.
to me, structural still needs to be addressed. If you look at the way it all starts with how our election system works. Our constituencies, the way they're delineated, and our first past the post system, those need to be reformed. They're entirely unsuitable for nation building, because we've got constituencies with 99,000 Malays and 2 Chinese, and we have other constituencies with 99,000 and 2 Malays.
But
not good for building nations.
You can help it, because the politics of today is still the politics of race, religion, and identity. And since big Barisan Nasional under Tun dulu, things has dismantled again. It is a fraction is taking place. But the only concern I have now, Nazir, people of 18 years old are going to be voters. And they are going to be voters in a matter of few months' time, a year's time, 18 tahun. But the critical thinking framework based on our education system, with not knowing what is our national ideology, which is hukum negara, the element of perpaduan, which is based on your father's report, laporan Razak or penyata Razak, that requires cohesion in terms of one national educational stream, semuanya is not there. Our rukun negara as a national ideology is far different from Pancasila di Indonesia. So the binding factors to create a body, a nation state, negara bangsa. We've got negara. Kalau ikut ke Samsul Amri, we've got negara, we don't have bangsa. Because kita punya bangsa is multiple of so many ethnicities. Jadi, in that context, how do you foresee the young people like Farah going forward to have a more reset Malaysia 3.0 or 4.0?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually this Undi 18 is a bit of a wild card. Nobody really knows what their sentiments will be. Tapi in the end of the day, we still have this issue that we have a first past the post system. I think we need to develop mixed constituencies or some form of proportional representation. I don't think we should have politicians who are able to win elections by taking, by pushing the identity card. I just think that's wrong, right? But the only way you can do that is to reform the electoral system. Yeah, and I think any academic book will tell you that in multi-ethnic societies, the fairer system is proportional representation, because then the minorities feel properly represented, right? And it all starts there, and then it goes to the parties. As soon as suddenly you have mixed constituencies, maybe multi-ethnic political parties can survive.
Yeah.
Right. And then then up to how Parliament conducts itself. So the reform must start, I think, in the reform of the electoral system.
All right. We have gone through all this multi-dimensional approach towards the leadership of Tun, his legacy, and how the formative age of Tun to make himself a leader, which is a very rare sort of person, a personality, a persona yang menganggotai dan membentuk kerajaan Malaysia as a negara bangsa waktu itu, yang sekarang ini fraction. So, kita ada 8 minit je. Saya nak minta kita nak go one by one for your last say or last interaction with Saudara Nazir. Saya minta Profesor Rahman.
Points, but I just paraphrase it very quickly. From the 1970s, Dr. Nazir, I mean, we have, of course have the National Consultative Council, and the product of that, the outcome of that was Rukun Negara, and of course also the Dasar Ekonomi Baru, and of course the new coalition of BN 14 parties in 1974. Now, the point that I think from that era was the Rukun Negara was a new national consensus. Now, moving forward to now, do you see that we can forge a new national narrative, new national consensus, by also reinventing, not necessarily inventing the same old form, a consultative assembly like the one that you are pushing. Yeah? And then related to that, I just want to quickly say something like this. That Tun Razak was credited for the national education policy to shape the nation. Now, one of the things that relate to the three of us, Tan Sri Aziz, Kamal, and myself, is Maktab Tentera Persekutuan then, or Maktab Tentera Diraja now. And Tun Razak, when he was a defense minister, he used to visit Sungai Besi. And that school, an embodiment of Malaysia. You have Malays, Chinese, Indians, Razak, whatever. And it was not just academic, but it was building character, personality, leadership. So can you comment on that? Is that a model for schools in Malaysia of the future? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. One is I really think that if we have a truly independent deliberative platform today, with the right composition of people, with the right legitimacy, we can do it. I would like it to be set up under the auspices of the Rulers' Council. I would like it to spend a year debating, arguing, coming up with recommendations, and I would like that recommendation to be tabled to Parliament. In the process with social media today, I think we can engage the public at large. Two is RMC is 100% a model. Many of my bosses as I grew up in the corporate career, Tan Sri Makno and all, were all from RMC. If I may say it here, I certainly preferred working for RMC than MCKK.
Just like your father, if I may add, your father who gave away Tun Razak punya hoki, ni Tan Sri Kamal ada sini, piala hoki antara MCKK dan RMC, and then when he witnessed the match, people asked him, which side are you? You know what Tun said? I come from the college, but RMC is under my Ministry of Defence. I will cite both of them. Okay, now I go. Before I go to Kamal, I go and see Farah, your young mind. How does your last question, last remark?
Okay, my last remark. Actually, this is what I hope the seniors, the superior, the management and the leaders, current leaders, to actually beri peluang kepada anak muda to participate, to be involved directly in the system, because I believe the system is really saturated and does not involve the young voice directly. Maybe mungkin di disuarakan, dicakap-cakap lah tentang penglibatan anak muda and all apa semua, but then dia dah jadi macam omong kosong and only dicakap sahaja, but there's no implementation and there's no execution on that part. So, to build a better nation moving forward to the future, you need the young voice, you need variation when it comes to building a nation, because I believe Tun Razak pun dulu, he groomed the leaders now, taking them when they were young. Hence, I believe current leaders should take an example from Tun Razak legacy when it comes to moving forward. Macam.
Okay. Nazir, your father identified succession plan. Tengku Razali and all, Musa Hitam, even Dr. Mahathir, as you said just now, were all the legacy of Tun punya leadership. Their plan sampai gafar bapa sampai kepada peringkat sekarang ni. Then it's no more. You mentioned at one stage, nak masuk Ali UMNO pun it takes you 2 years, to get through. Because they are scared of the educated people, orang-orang muda yang berilmu. So nak nak ambil tempat dia. So this is the culture that we are facing now. There's no more succession plan, as what Farah said. Berkurangan, cakap banyak tapi tak berlaku on the ground.
Yeah, I think great question, Farah, even though you come from Maybank, not CIMB. But I just mentioned that actually I've actually come up with one idea, which is I think we should make it mandatory for all boards to have one anak muda seat, because of the generational gap today, particularly with technology, etc. We need young people on leadership platforms. So every board, I think, should have one pro seat dedicated for anak muda. And I put out the recommendation. And of course, I totally agree that
Thank you.
Since the 80s, tak ada orang muda in leadership in government.
UMP has started, Nazir. Kita ada an ex-UMP student, alumni at the age of 27 yang baru kan. Apa tu, Mak Yasir, orang Johor, on the board sekarang ni, mewakili, 27 years old, which is very good.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Datuk Asnah, Dr. Asnah. Unmute.
Okay. Sorry. Saya melihat kepimpinan Tun Razak adalah lebih dekat dengan rakyat berbanding dengan beberapa pemimpin yang saya lihat pada hari ini. Jadi saya melihat mungkin disebabkan latar belakang beliau yang pernah bekerjasama dengan almarhum Tunku Abdul Rahman dahulu memperjuangkan kemerdekaan negara. Jadi saya rasa dia mendapat aura daripada situ untuk memperjuangkan nasib bangsa dia. So to me, Tun Abdul Razak memimpin untuk rakyat. Okay, bukan untuk kedudukan dan kuasa. That's all from me. Thank you.
Correctly so. Tasri Kamal?
I want to say in conclusion that I agree very much with what Nazir said about the system being broken. And while more consultation may be needed, we just, however, have to live with the current system until it is reformed. So basically, we got a window of about 1.5 years until the GE15, which I think will see a lot more independent candidates, a lot more three-corner fights, and a lot more youthful candidates and a youthful vote, and will be quite crucial for many political parties. But I don't think in the next 1.5 years there can be the deep-seated transformation or reform that is needed institutionally speaking. So the Prime Minister Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri has got this 1.5 years, this window, which he must take into account. And while he is subject to political support from his own party, I think he has to reach out across the boundary and bring in a bit more non-partisan
Yeah.
kind of politics in order to come up with plans and policies. He was talking already about 100 in the next 100 days for his cabinet. I mean, it's quite easy from an economic point of view. And I, in MIR, and I was there until last April, worked out a plan and presented to the previous government. There are a lot of plans. We don't finance for it. Until you sort out, get the politics right, we are going to continue to be muddling through. I would agree that while there is going to need for consultation, but we already had consultation. There's already a council for economic recovery. There's a council for COVID and so on. And the long term, as Nazir suggested, there's much more deeper thinking and a lack of, uh, be brave to receive radical ideas for transformation. So I
Yeah.
suggest that the new Prime Minister, takes up the question of working with the opposition uh, in terms of a Confidence and Supply Act, so that we can do an initial reform, just so to allow for the under 18 vote, which we are not ready to implement, to allow for youth candidates to have policies brought to the people for them to decide in the EEP. But and then at the same time, you undertake some of the what we call recommendations from birthday, for instance, on political funding, on this kind of things which will make the next election to be a fair reflection, including the youth vote of the country or the people. In the end, it's the people that's important. The political system is broken, and that has to be repaired first. And therefore, the President and Prime Minister has that task.
Thank you Tan Sri. Now to wrap up, jemput Datuk Sri Nazir Razak for your overall statements on what we discussed.
Yeah,
Roughly.
thank you, Tan Sri, and thank you for honoring my father's memory in this way. It's been a very fruitful session. I've learned a lot from the other speakers, and I think we have discussed some very, very important issues, and most importantly is as I said, it's not what tangible things Tun Razak did.
Yeah,
It's
yes.
the value system from which we can learn from to help the future. And I hope that PM now we have first time Agong and PM
Yes.
from
Yeah.
Pahang. I hope in some way we can get to a better place. I think we need to give this PM some room. I think maybe he had a lot of constraints in formation of the cabinet, but maybe he accepted that because the way forward is, as Tan Sri Kamal said, a CSA and some very firm show of his determination after 100 days, where he will remove the underperforming ministers and so on. But at the same time, I repeat again that I do feel that the time is short, and I do hope that the Rulers Council actually take this idea that we should form a deliberative assembly to really deal with structural long-term issues of the nation, as Tun Razak did in 1970.
Okay. Thank you very much, Datuk Sri Nazir. Bagi pihak Institut Tamadun dan Kajian Strategik Universiti Malaysia Pahang, saya nak mengucapkan berbanyak terima kasih di atas sudinya Datuk Sri Nazir bersama kita dan sahabat-sahabat kita yang lain, Emeritus Profesor Datuk Rahman, Tan Sri Kamal Saleh, Dr. Hasna dan Farah, bagi kita betul-betul fikiran. Banyak isu yang kita bangkitkan, tapi yang lebih pentingnya saya tergerak based on the comments made by both Tan Sri Kamal and also Datuk Sri Nazir berkenaan dengan sepatutnya kita membentukkan satu framework, mencadangkan satu framework dalam window yang 1 tahun lebih ini untuk Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri membuatkan framework baru, reset Malaysia 3.0 ke 4.0 ke, semoga we embrace the young people, we embrace the future of the nation together dengan satu perpaduan yang kuat. Jadi itulah harapan, dan saya mengharapkan iTKAS, Institut Tamadun dan Kajian Strategik Pahang, dapat memulakan parameter ini, membentuk satu naratif kehadapan berasaskan legasi Allahyarham Tun Haji Abdul Razak. Kerana saya nak sudahi dengan Al-Fatihah kepada Allahyarham Tun dan salah seorang the young leader waktu itu yang baru saja meninggal dunia, ahli karya masjid saya di Bukit Damansara, iaitu Allahyarham yang amat berbahagia Tun Ahmad Sarji, baru saja meninggal dunia pagi tadi. Dan kepada mereka, kepada dan juga pemimpin-pemimpin yang lain, Al-Fatihah. Terima kasih. Semoga Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala memberikan kekuatan, rahmat dan barakahnya untuk kita meneruskan perjuangan yang masih belum selesai. Mudah-mudahan kita selamat dunia dan akhirat. Sekian, wabillahi taufiq. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.